Welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The intro and outro music for these episodes are by Otter Creek.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Natasha Helfer. I'm a relational and sex therapist, and this is my podcast where we try to attack shame and get healthier through education, stories, and relationships. So today, I am thrilled to have April Davis on the show. She is the founder and creator of the Vagina blog, the Vagina blog podcast. She has like 50,000 followers on Instagram. It's so fun to follow you and all your information. So I'm just super excited to have you. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm so excited to be here. I could talk about vaginas all day long.
All right. So right off the bat, we're going to say, this is probably, we're going to be talking about female bodies. So whether that's people who identify as women, sometimes trans men, non-binary folks, if you've got a vagina or a vulva, or if you're interested in vaginas or vulvas, this is it's going to be an interesting conversation, I hope. So yeah, so I want to just kind of get started by asking you about April Davis. Like, who are you? How did you get into this? What is your background? How did you develop this platform? So that's a lot wrapped up in one question, but let's get started there.
I always, when I ask this, I feel like I am so long-winded, but it's a long journey.
So I would imagine.
I started in emergency medicine 20 years ago. So I fell in love with like the human body and everything else about it. I've always had a natural curiosity around sex and also just female body health in general. I was definitely the one who introduced my roommates to a menstrual disc. I happened into them at Walmart when this is 20 years ago. And I was like, what is this? Took it home and I was like, you put this in your vagina, guys. We have to try this. And they were like, no, we're not doing that. So it's been a natural curiosity of mine. It's been a natural part of my life. Loved emergency medicine. I also went to school for visual technology. So photo, film, graphic design, all that type of stuff. So very eclectic background that way. Fast forward a couple of years, I became really interested in becoming a doula. And because of my medical background, I was very luckily hired on by a certified nurse midwife as her assistant. So I started attending births as a second set of hands to a midwife, basically doing home birth and then birth center births. Absolutely fell in love with birth work. And once you start hanging out with birth workers, they also all are very obsessed with cyclical living, fertility awareness method living, alternative menstrual products and reusable menstrual products. And so kind of got into the menstrual space. The nurse midwife that I worked for, because nurse midwives are nurse practitioners, they can write scripts and things. So she was working with birth control and kind of everything around all that, along with doing deliveries. So it gave me the opportunity to get a really intimate look at so many of these things at the same time. While I was working as a birth assistant, I started taking on my own doula clients. And then because I have a photography background and worked as a photographer, I did a lot of birth photography. What I started to notice was the home births I was attending were very different from the hospital births that I was attending. And especially whether or not I was there as a doula. When I was there as a doula, doctors and nurses behaved a certain way. When I was there as a photographer, they didn't. And I started to see this huge disparity in care and in how people were treated, depending on how witnessed the care team felt. So if I was there as a photographer, they carried on business as usual, and I saw a lot of really horrible things happen. If I was there as a doula, still saw some terrible things happen, but significantly less. And then as I was attending home births, I was getting to see birth just unfold as it can and does. I got to see women in their power. And I think that's probably one of my greatest takeaways from working in birth for the years that I did. It really shifted because I was so in my masculine for the first half of my life. It really shifted how incredibly powerful the feminine is. and how much I really wanted to breathe life into that side of me. And I wanted to help other people do that. So after I had a very difficult third pregnancy myself, and then my daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes immediately after my son was born, my life became a little bit hectic. And so going back into the chaos of birth work wasn't as much of a possibility because you're on call 24/7.
Right.
And so I was like, I have more information about vaginas than anyone I know. I am done seeing people have horrible things happen to them in the birth space. And I'm tired of the lack of education that we have. I'm tired of people having unhappy sex lives. I'm tired of people having terrible things happen to them when they're the most vulnerable while they're delivering a baby. I'm tired of just the mess that we're in terms of women's health, right? Because it's a hot mess here in the US. I really wanted to change things. So I started the Vagina blog. I was like, I'm going to build this platform. I am going to save the whole world. I'm going to tell everyone about everything, and it's going to fix all the problems. I'm going to get rid of the terrible maternal mortality rates. We're just going to go ahead and fix that. I'm going to make sure everyone's no longer faking orgasms. We're all going to have orgasms. I'm going to make sure doctors stop doing crappy things to people. We're going to stop that too. So that was almost 6 years ago. I haven't saved the world yet, but I am still trying.
One vagina at a time. Okay.
One at a time.
I love it. Okay, so I mean, we could go a lot of different directions.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe it's helpful to just get your perspective on women's health, right? So I mean, I've been in the sex therapy field for a long time, and this is a complaint we often hear. I've gone to I don't know if you've heard of the ISHWISH conference a few times, which is about women's health and medicine. And I think everybody understands that, yeah, medicine has, prioritized male health, historically for eons. From the beginning, medicine started at a time when misogyny was alive and well. And it still is in many ways. And so we're behind in understanding the female body, female anatomy. So what do you want to say about, like, as you were studying medicine and starting to understand women's health, what is the state of women's health, especially having to do with genital health?
Oh, it's horrible. I mean, at the end of the day, misogyny and racism are built into Western healthcare. They just are. And people do not like hearing this. And I don't blame them. I didn't want any of this stuff to be true either. But at the end of the day, when I was learning how to do IVs, we were taught that darker skin, you had to poke harder. That wasn't that long ago. That was in my textbook.
Yeah.
We were also taught all sorts of different random racist things about how people process pain and what kind of pain medication you should use depending on the color of the person's skin. That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you multiply that with the idea that we weren't studying the female body, they weren't required to include female bodies in medical research until 1993. Yeah. I mean, that's nuts. A lot of the medications that we have on the market were never actually tested on a female body.
Yeah.
And then you look at things too, like one of the worst examples, I was just seeing the forehead thermometers. They never tested them on different colors of skin. They read differently on darker skin because of the melanin. So they've been misdiagnosing people's temperatures like forever. It's built in. It's just built in, and it sucks. And I'm kind of done with it. It is so disturbing to me that in the United States of America, where we pay the most for our healthcare, our maternal mortality rate just keeps rising. And it's disproportionately affecting people of color. And everyone's like, oh, racism's not a thing. And I'm like, but it is. It is, because when you control for education, for socioeconomic status, the rates get worse. You should see it get better. Typically, we see higher socioeconomic and higher education, typically going to have a better time at the hospital with them not killing you. That doesn't work when it comes to race. They actually get worse. So racism is alive and well here in the United States in healthcare, especially when it comes to the female body. And you look at things like fibroids. I mean, this is what's hard when you look at generational trauma and then you look at how that affects women's health. This is why we're seeing such high rates of fibroids, endometriosis, pain with periods. And we've normalized all this. I cannot tell you how many messages I get from people daily that are saying, I can't even move when I'm menstruating. I'm in so much pain. And my doctor just keeps telling me that that's normal. Or every time I try to have intercourse, it hurts so bad. And my doctor just told me to have a glass of wine. Just go get drunk. Because
Mhm.
a doctor should be advising you to get drunk
To help your vagina
to
enjoy
help
sex.
your vagina. Like,
Yeah, it
this
is.
is
It's maddening. I
insanity.
mean, the
It's
treatment for
baffling,
the treatments for vaginismus and all that are still lacking tremendously.
comical. Yeah,
And and you're absolutely right. For many years, I mean, just women would go from doctor to doctor to doctor, just basically saying it's all in your head.
yep,
Pat,
yep.
relax. Pat, have a glass of wine. Very
Hmm.
condescending.
Have a
Um,
kid. Just get pregnant and have a kid. That'll fix everything. That's my other favorite one that we're still hearing.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And you're right. I
Come
mean, I
back
think
when you
that
want to get pregnant.
one of the things I hear the most working with women, especially coming from conservative backgrounds, is
Um,
one, sex is going to hurt. My mom told me that. My aunts told me that. My friends
yep,
told me that. My sisters told me that.
yep,
Um, yeah, cramps, of course,
yeah.
and those are not really accurate things that should be happening. So, yeah, so when you say that you were, noticing terrible things in the birthing space, do you want to give voice to maybe two or three examples of what you mean by that?
Husband stitches, those were very much still a thing. So, especially when I very first started as a doula, they would just stitch you up tighter than you started.
So, in an episiotomy type of
Oh,
procedure.
no, that's a whole other problem. So episiotomies are a whole other thing. Like if you had any tearing, which happens, or you had an episiotomy, when they're going to stitch you up, they just put in an extra stitch or two for dad.
So that your vagina's tighter.
Tighter. That is not, vaginas do not stretch out. I did an entire research project on vaginal laxity. This was so disturbing all by itself. The assessments of vaginal laxity are your partner fills out a quiz determining how loose they think your vagina is. It is insane. Like I was so shocked. And the treatments that they have for vaginal laxity are so disturbing. So the first, if you think you're suffering from vaginal laxity, about 50% of the time, based on the pelvic floor physical therapists I've talked to, you're actually too tight, and that's why you're not experiencing sensation. You're too tight, it's not too loose. And if you are experiencing laxity, stitching up the outside of your vagina tighter doesn't fix the problem. And so it is so disturbing to watch.
Explain what you mean by laxity. Maybe not everybody would understand what you mean by
There
that.
is this idea that is, I don't even understand why or how, that if you've had kids or you've had lots of intercourse, somehow this stretches out your vagina by causing it to be lax and causing vaginal laxity. This is a myth. If this were true, would penises not also be withering away with intercourse? Because my vagina is powerful enough to shove out like 8-pound babies. That should be essentially dangerous to a penis, don't you think? Like very muscular, in great shape. So, but oddly enough, no one is shaming men for their withering penises. It is us women and our loose vaginas because we like to have intercourse. Like that is so, it just infuriates me. But I sat down. I remember one time I was consulting with someone on a product and they had some guy there and he like sat down and he was like, no, what do you do? And I was like, I'm the vagina blog. He's like, do you help women when their vaginas get all, loose and stuff after? And I was like, after what? He's like, And I was like, I don't. Explain it to me. What makes a woman's vagina loose? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Mm-hmm. He was not amused when I asked him if his penis was withering away.
Right.
So husband stitches. I saw episiotomies without consent multiple times. I saw people given drugs without their consent multiple times. I watched a doctor, probably the most angry I've been at a birth. It did not help that it was a friend of mine. Her epidural had worn off, which was very apparent. She delivered in a lot of pain and wasn't able to move very well. So it was rough. And then he went to stitch her up. And she started screaming and I walked over and I was like, what is going on? Because I walked over with the baby. I came back and I was like, what's going on? She was like, that hurts so bad. What is he doing? And I like looked down he has a bottle of lidocaine sitting on his tray. And I was like, her epidural wore off. And he was like, I know. And I was like, you have Lido on your tray. It takes 5 minutes to put that in. He's like, I'm almost done. And finished stitching her up without lidocaine. Like,
Wow.
I can't. It like makes me so angry.
Raging.
And they're not held accountable
Right.
because this happens in the birth room. And they had to. I love this concept. Oh, we had to. No, you didn't. Because I've seen too many births now where she didn't have to. Like my midwife, there is never an emergency so fraught that you don't have time for a 30-second conversation. There just isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so when you're doing home births, for example, they're really, is there stitching at all?
No, totally. Yeah, so there's not epidurals, obviously, right? So like you are doing everything unmedicated, but afterwards, absolutely, we give you lidocaine. So, and that's a quick, easy, like, hey, we got to do a couple mean pokes, not super fine. We're gonna be lidocaine, local anesthetic, and numb you up, and then we'll stitch up. Because once again, I was living with a nurse midwife. This is a nurse practitioner with a home practice. So she had essentially, we carried a lot of the same stuff that you would see in the hospital, but it was always like, and if we need this, it's here, So if we need to do stitches, we can.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, at this point, is there any reason to do an episiotomy ever?
Yeah, there absolutely is. But it's extremely rare. It's like a lot of the interventions that we're seeing more and more and more of. Yes, absolutely. There's need for those things, but it's so rare. So I watched my midwife probably do 2 episiotomies over the 5 years working with her. And both times they were so needed, such a wonderful thing, and a quick stitch. Like she never took more than she needed. The difference I saw too, have you ever cut chicken meat with kitchen shears? That type of like deep snip into that muscular kind of, that's what I saw a lot in the hospital. With Cindy, it was paper thin because we'd let them push on it for a while, let that skin thin out. And it was like, tink, baby's born. So yeah, episiotomies are a great tool. C-sections are a great tool. All of this technology we have, incredible blessing, right? Amazing that we have access to this. It's been overused. We've normalized a lot of really harmful practices, and we're not trusting in evidence-based care still in the hospital setting oftentimes. And I don't want to sound too like, I love home birth. I had my 3rd at home. It's my favorite. It is not for everyone. There are many reasons to have a baby in the hospital and be in that type of environment. And I always encourage people to deliver where you feel safest and the most comfortable with a provider that you can trust, whatever that looks like. Because I have been to beautiful planned C-sections and really terrible home births. We have a midwife down here that I don't like. And she's worse than an OB a lot of the time. So.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's not that all hospitals are bad and all home births are good, but there's options, and we learn, I think, from all settings in regards to things. And I agree with you that I think many wonderful procedures that are available, instead of just available as needed, have become too routine, right? And just an expected part of the birthing process. I've got a listener saying, Rhonda says, I heard an OBGYN talk about a husband stitch right after the birth when the environment should have been centered around mom and baby bonding, right? So even the context and what we're focused on in the moment, immediately we get to male-centric sex, right? Sexual pleasure instead of...
Shockingly. I photographed one, and I remember the dad wanted to catch the baby. This is in the hospital. So he gowned up from head to toe, along with the male OB who was gowning up from head to toe. So this whole room full of nurses and the person delivering all had to pause while we watched them get into their outfits and then arduously go through and deliver this baby. And it was just the most like you guys just really, really needed to make it about you right now. And it was so sad. Like, I don't know, like, it is such an opportunity to see women in their power and to have a very rewarding experience. And it's not that men shouldn't be part of it. Like my husband was very much a huge support for myself when I was in labor. And even as a doula, my goal was always to like center the partnership, right? Help the husband, help them, like help the partner, help them. I think that's really important. It's a really essential bonding time.
Yeah.
But to have it so centered on male sexuality and like the deliverer, like it was just
Yeah.
sad.
Right. Okay. So with the question about what you've seen in the birthing center, you came up with the husband stitch, you came up with episiotomies. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we move in a different direction?
There's so many other things, but we can move on. I'm just gonna get more angry.
I know, right? Well, so one thing that you kind of talked about is cyclical pain, right? So menstrual pain, endometriosis, like you're saying, fibrous cysts, whatever. So can you just give what would you want women to know about menstruation?
It's that pain isn't normal. We have normalized. It may be common, right? It's like painful sex. Maybe that's common, not normal.
Yeah.
And if your care provider is brushing it off, it's time to find a new care provider. Like I'm just ready to get rid of all of the care providers that are just not doing a good job. And if they are ignoring you, have that, make sure, use this phrase. Can you write down in my chart that you refuse to treat me and that you refuse like to care for me? If you could put that in my chart, I would super appreciate it because my next doctor needs to know what has happened here. That typically will change their tune. If it doesn't, then you're going to go leave them a Facebook and a Google review. I am tired of people going to bad care providers. I'm over the bad treatment. I'm over the bad care. And this is one of the easiest ways to help change some of those attitudes and the way that people are being treated. So make sure they note that in your chart and then go find someone that is going to offer you care. Because you shouldn't be experiencing pain every single period. You should not be in horrendous amounts of pain, irregular cycles, pain, all this stuff. There's root causes to all of this, and birth control does not treat anything. All it does is shut off your natural hormone cycle and replace it with synthetic ones. You are not cycling. You are not menstruating. You are going through breakthrough withdrawal bleeding from the drug that you're on. That's all. So that's my other irritation. So many people that are using hormonal birth control are using it because they're managing one of these ailments when they could be managing it in a totally different way and not have an entire hormone cycle shut down. It is such an insult that the medical management for almost all female body ailments is to shut off an entire hormone cycle. They should be embarrassed at how terrible they are at taking care of these things.
Yeah. Well, I feel like physicians are kind of in the same position I was in as a sex therapist. Like when I went through my program, my initial, foundational program, I was not prepared for sexuality. I really wasn't. I wasn't really prepared, even though I was a marriage and family therapist where you think a lot of sex needs to be addressed.
Marriage and family therapists don't study sex.
No, we don't. So I had to go.
I wanted to get,
no, we don't. But neither do social workers, and neither do professional counselors, and neither do clinical psychologists. And
no, you have to want to study sexuality.
I had to go specialize in it. I had to go seek it, and I didn't even know where to go when I first started. Right. So, I mean, I found ASECT by goodness grief through Google. And I think OBGYN physicians are in a similar spot. Like they're not being trained in medical school to deal with female health and female bodies. So they have to go and get specialized or extra trainings and even do the research themselves because the research doesn't even exist yet, And so I think that that's really fascinating. So yes, you think, I'm going to go see an OBGYN. They must know about my female body, but it really just is not in the training. So women's sexual health is a specialty that you actually have to kind of look for when you're looking for a doctor.
And oftentimes you actually probably need a pelvic floor physical therapist. Like not with menstrual stuff, but if you are dealing with pelvic pain and other issues, that's your, and no one refers out to pelvic floor physical therapists half the time. I'm just shocked. My health psychology professor, it was really interesting because we were talking about how there are challenges. The male body's on a 24-hour hormone cycle, the female body's on a 28, 32-day hormone cycle. When you're testing a drug, these are two very different populations to be testing drugs on. But she was like, shame on them for not accepting the challenge and doing better. And I was like, that's exactly right. Shame on all of them. Like, and shame on them for only having birth control as their best option for fixing or helping anything. There's so many amazing functional medicine things you can do to improve your cycle. A couple of years ago, actually, the Rocky Mountain Sex Summit, Laura Brydon was there, and I was obsessed with her before that, and then was so excited to meet her there. But she wrote a book called The Period Repair Manual and The Hormone Repair Manual. To date, those are still two of my most favorite books to recommend to people if they are experiencing anything going on with their menstrual cycle. She has like every single thing listed that you like, each chapter is and you can just jump to that chapter if you're like, I have really horrible cramps. And she's like, cool, here's what we're going to do. Done.
I love it. We'll definitely link to those recommendations that you're listing. So yeah, and I do think, and again, not that birth control wouldn't be an avenue, I think, for some issues,
totally.
But shouldn't be the avenue for all issues.
No, and it's a band-aid, right? So here's the other thing too that I tell people, because they're like, look, I have this thing, I got on the birth control, it's making the thing feel better. And it's like, okay, well, maybe just are you having terrible side effects from birth control? No. Maybe take a beat. Enjoy not having your symptoms for a second. When you have the energy to deal with it, maybe you can get down to the roots of the actual problem, because life is life, right? And so many of us are working and having kids and doing, like there's a lot going on. We don't always have the time and space to get to the root cause of the problem and fix it. And birth control is a great band-aid in the meantime. And also there's just that reality of like, I don't want to get pregnant. I don't want to do fertility awareness method. I hate condoms. Can I just put in an IUD and call it a day?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, and like you said, for some people, there aren't a lot of symptoms, there aren't a lot of side effects, but for a lot of people, there are. And I think this is something that, doesn't get addressed a lot either, as far as, and again, the recommendation for fertility, work is kind of up to women. I mean, men have condoms, and we know that they're used not very well. Even in today's world where we've, done a lot of marketing around safe sex and around condom use, we still have lots of resistance from male individuals around condom use. Yep. And we don't really have other options for men to be hormonally shifted in their fertility. So it really lays all of the burden, the fertility burden, on female bodies.
Which is still bananas, because we can only get pregnant this much. Men can just be out there, male bodies out there, just impregnating people left and right all day long. They are fertile 24 hours a day, every single day, until they die. It is ridiculous that we're the ones carrying the burden, but at the end of the day, we're also the ones carrying the pregnancy.
Yeah, right.
So I would tell people, if you still want to use a barrier method and you're not into external condoms, consider internal condoms, consider diaphragms, cervical caps, spermicide. Like, there are other barrier methods that are not tight per se. And there's their options. And that's something else. I love talking about the different birth control options. And I also love talking about all the different options for menstrual products, because this is another conversation that people still aren't having and are still a little bit like, I don't want to step out of what we've made the norm. I don't know.
Right. Well, before we totally move on from menstruation, and not that I would expect you to do anything comprehensive, because we could talk for 1,500 hours to make it comprehensive.
Yes.
What would be like one or two things that you feel would be underlying causes that women don't typically know about for menstrual pain?
Tampons.
Tell me more.
Those are a huge one. am shocked, and having now experienced myself, and then now getting hundreds of DMs about people when they get away from tampons. So if you really think about how a tampon works, we have a scratchy, typically not organic. So, and unfortunately, those crops are some of the most heavily pesticided crops, right? That tampons are made out of. So we're putting a dry, scratchy, pesticide-laden plug in our vagina, which is mucous membrane. So we have mucous membrane, which is highly absorbent, just soaking up whatever that tampon is made out of. The tampon is causing micro tears, and it's also disintegrating slightly because most people do not check to see how much of their tampon came back out when they remove them. So one of the biggest problems that they're seeing is because they're disintegrating and because they cause the micro tearing, we then have it absorbing straight into the bloodstream, right? Also, if you have something that is cramping and trying to get rid of it and you're plugging it, you're going to be causing irritation. They're seeing this is causing like menstrual flow to get trapped sometimes in the cervix. So you now have old menstrual flow rotting, you have scratches, you have pesticides, you have a whole host of issues, right? Tampons are bad news. They are not good for your vagina. Even if you do switch to organic, they just used organic pesticide. So it's not like it suddenly is pesticide free. It's not. So getting away from tampon use, on average, what I have seen, and this is people DMing me, and this is my own personal, your period's going to get a couple days shorter because you're allowing period it to flow. You're going to have significantly less cramping, or you might have no cramping at all once you get away from doing anything inside the vaginal canal. And you're probably going to see lighter periods. So I've had a lot of people switch to period underwear, especially, and they're like, I had no idea that my period could be only 2 days and that I could be so without any pain. And this is so much better. Why were we ever using that garbage? And I'm like, and it's hard. I get a lot of flack when I talk about tampons and what they do, because people are like, well, sometimes that's the only thing that's accessible, or the only thing that people can afford, or the only thing. I hear you. And it's like the birth control thing too. If it's working for you right now and it's the only thing you have available, sure. But at the end of the day, if you invest in a disc or cup, that's going to save you hundreds of dollars easily. Even period underwear, which are a little bit pricey up front, still going to save you hundreds of dollars. And you're not going to be dealing with the side effects of tampons.
So not to put you on the spot, but I remember having quite difficult cramps when I was starting my period, back when I was 12, 13, 14, and I was not using tampons, right? At that time, I didn't start using tampons till I was about 15 or 16 years old. So what other reasons might there be menstrual pain?
Well, especially, I feel like young menstruators just have it rough. So are we drinking enough water? Are we getting enough nutrients? Are we getting enough sleep? Like, especially I feel like teens are terrible at all of these things. And I look at their difficult periods sometimes and I just think, like, would it be as bad if you would actually sleep at night and eat a vegetable sometimes and drink enough water, not other stuff, water? Coming from a teen mom, girl.
Right.
So you look at some of that stuff that you need to like have nice regulated hormones, right? Teenagers are not great at this. So I do wonder how much of it is that. And then they may have other things going on. They might not have enough vitamin D, magnesium, and zinc. And getting on those things might be all you need to do. I was amazed. Just getting on a regular zinc supplement cleared up my hormonal acne for the most part. Like I'll still get a little bit of a break, but not anything like I did. And I cannot tell you how many people are on birth control just for their acne. I'm like, did anyone even suggest you try zinc? So there's a lot of these little, like, are we going through a nutrient deficiency? Are we experiencing endometriosis, PCOS? Because that shows up with young menstruators as well. Are we, like I said, nutrients? Like what kind of habits and routines and lifestyle stuff do we have going on? And then on top of it too, I'm like, were you also still being forced to run in PE? Were you also still being forced to play soccer, lacrosse, like do all the things? Because I feel like our generations were really taught, like anything you can do, I can do bleeding. And I'm just going to push through. I'm going to push through and push through and push through. And how different would it have been if you'd been allowed to respect your body and respect the pain that you were experiencing and respect that you were menstruating?
Right. And I think that it's probably important too to distinguish between pain and discomfort. I mean, I do think that some some cramping, some bloating,
Normal. Yeah.
some, like even when you're ovulating, right?
Mhm.
Mid cycle, you
Yep.
may feel some, kind of little tiny, I don't know if I'd call them pain,
Twinges.
but kind
I get
of,
them on one side. It's Mittelschmerz is their name.
I
Middle
love that.
pain. I know, right? A little German for
Very,
you.
very cool.
So, but yeah, it's those. That's normal, and that's kind of I used to use that a lot in the birth world. We have pain, and then we have suffering, right? Like you just said, discomfort, normal, not unusual. Heaviness, kind of crampy, kind of like really normal. Suffering, not normal. Something's going on.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and as you're talking about, the female body versus the male body, it's interesting because I think in so many ways, especially, as feminists and things of that nature, we do want to be able to be seen as being able to do it all, and historically what has doing it all has been defined by what male bodies can do, right? And so it's not like men were trying to act like women. It's like women were expected to act like men through kind of the initial feminist movements. And in some ways, we're not as different as we have been taught to think, right? So a lot of times I get the whole men are from Mars and women are from Venus and all these ways that we think we're different. We're actually not that different.
No.
But then there are ways that we are different,
Ex-
anatomically different,
Yeah. And that's
depending on
okay.
chromosomes, your hormones, and so I think that's a tricky balance. Do you want to talk about that at all? Like,
Oh, absolutely. Because I think there's so much truth. Because I also get really fed up with some of that. I love flipping the script on things. Like a lot of people reach out to me and just be like, I feel like my husband only wants me for sex because he's after me because, and I don't want it. And he's still like, and I don't ever want to like advocate for like a pushy or inappropriate relationship. But I was like, does your husband have sex with you when he doesn't feel like it, but you do? And they're like, well, yeah. Are you being inappropriate by wanting to do that? Well, no. Okay, we don't need to put that on our male partners all the time, right? We can flip some of these scripts, like, and that's okay in partnerships. So I think just like that, like, men have emotions and feelings. And I hate that we've created this weird masculine prototype. I'm like, none of that, that's not what masculinity is. So,
right.
and I think that there's so many strengths. I love the balance that can be found because males' bodies have that 24-hour hormone cycle and female bodies have this longer hormone cycle. I love to compare it to the moon and the sun. You would never ask the moon to be the sun, and you would never ask the sun to be the moon. They both have unique properties. They're both very much needed. They have served different purposes, but they also work together. And I look at it that way. And I think for people who are non-binary or two-spirit, or even those that are trans, I think you can choose to align however you want to with either a masculine or feminine hormone cycle or both. Because as females and female bodies, like as women, we are asked to oftentimes live so much more on a masculine hormone cycle. It can be very frustrating because working 9 to 5, getting up at the same time, eating the same thing, doing the same exercise routine every single day. This works amazing on a 24-hour hormone cycle. This is a lot more difficult on a 28-day hormone cycle. It looks different. And not all of us are able to completely shift our entire everything over to that feminine hormone cycle. But I've also found it really interesting that sometimes the moon is out during the day.
Mm.
Right.
Mhm.
So, and I love the anima and animus. Like I get really into Jung, right? We love this, like, because I think within all of us, there's that yin and yang. We have to find our internal balance between our masculine and our feminine. And I think we all have both. So I love watching that unlock in people, whether they're in a female body or a male body.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the first times that I heard you speak was at a retreat we did together. And you did talk about kind of tuning into this 28 cyclic pattern,
Living.
right? Which I think
Mm-hmm.
most of us have been taught to ignore because
Mm-hmm.
we need to fit into, we need to fit into the work space or the school space or whatever space everybody's expecting us to function under. So yeah, what are a few nuggets of wisdom that you have around cyclical kind of tuning in. I even remember getting a few books that you recommended because I was so like, it was just lovely. It was lovely to kind of connect with this,
Isn't it
kind of
fun?
cyclical space.
Yes. I love teaching about the different rites and rituals of the menstrual cycle and the way that you can move through this. So quick recap on the 4 seasons of the menstrual cycle. We start with the menstrual phase, which we're all the most familiar with. I feel like this is when we're actively bleeding. We move from that into our follicular phase. Typically with follicular, we're going to see a return of some energy and we're going to have kind of that doing. And we have a rise of testosterone at that time too. So that week of follicular is oftentimes when we feel the most aligned and at home living in our very masculine societies. One thing is I have coached and worked with people who menstruate is they've felt very frustrated because they're like, there's always, and I can get it together and I can do the meal prep and I can do the work and I can do that and I stay on top of everything. And then all of a sudden it all just falls apart and I feel like I'm failing because I can't hold that same standard. And that is something that I love shifting for people. Follicular phase energy is awesome. Let's capitalize on it. Let's use it, but let's not get so attached to it, right? Enjoy it while it's here. Enjoy ovulation phase, same thing. That comes after follicular. This is when we're ovulating. This is typically when our libido is highest, our testosterone has peaked. And this is a great time to kind of wrap everything up, finish things up because we still have that energy. We move from there into our luteal phase, which is that period of time before we menstruate. This is also one of the longer phases of the menstrual cycle. And this is one of the more difficult ones for a lot of people. It gets a bad rap because this is when we see PMDD, PMS. This is when we see that up and down of emotions and feelings, but we're losing all of our hormones at the same time midway through the luteal phase. So we're seeing a crash in progesterone and a crash in estrogen, and we're feeling it. It's hard because when I initially teach this, people will bristle and be like, no.
Right. Like we want to be productive all the time.
And we have been conditioned to live in this masculine society, right? Our society is so masculine. It was built by men for men. It is what it is. But we want to, right? We want to stay in that, and we can't, and that's okay. It is okay to be like, I need to lay down a little bit more. I need to rest a little bit more. I need to maybe look out for what's going on with my body a little bit more during this time. I just need a little bit more. So for me, I hit it hard during follicular and ovulation. Luteal is when I kind of start to step back from some stuff. And it is hard. I get a lot, must be nice to be able, must be. And it's like, no, this is coming from someone who has a very full life. It is intentional. It's all about intention. It's not that you don't go to work. It's that maybe you shift how you work. Maybe it isn't thinking in day to day. Maybe it's thinking month to month. Maybe it's looking at your entire menstrual cycle and working within that. The more I've done that, the more easy my life has become, the more able I've been able to accomplish a lot of things, do a lot, work a lot. But it required an intentional shift to that type of mentality, and also making peace with that part of myself and seeing the power in it. And this all comes back to birth for me. Once I saw women fully in their power, you can't unsee that. It's so incredible. And I was like, I want to live in this all the time.
I remember reading a book called The Red Tent eons ago for book club. And, it's kind of like this historical fiction or whatever.
I want to bring it back.
Very fiction. But we were all like, we want to sit in a tent for a week and just kind of, kind of healthy. And we don't really allow that. And then, I mean, I think that men are also damaged by the productivity, expectations.
Totally.
But I think especially when you have all these physical things that are happening in a female body, to keep up with that productivity idea is problematic for sure.
All of us. Truly. I mean, that's the hard thing about patriarchy, right? It is harming everybody. It is not just women.
Right. So let's move on so we've talked about pain, we've talked about menstruation, we've talked about birth. Let's talk about sex. Yay! So, what are some things that you're kind of either constantly surprised or excited to talk about because you feel like, oh wow, people don't really understand the power of pleasure or the power of you know, what their genitalia, what their vaginas, what their vulvas, what their clits, you know, all these beautiful parts of our bodies, what their capacity and potential for pleasure is.
Here's what I feel like every single podcast I'm on from now until forever, I'm just going to keep telling everyone, stop faking orgasms. It is problematic in a number of ways. And here's how and why. If we're faking orgasms, this means that we are unwilling with our partners to have a frank conversation about what's working for us. This is a problem because if you can't talk to your most trusted partner about your own pleasure, you're not going to advocate for yourself at the doctor. You're not going to teach your kids how to advocate for themselves. You're not going to talk about, and I had someone point out, they're like, this is victim blaming, like the doctor shouldn't be. And I'm like, absolutely, the doctor should not be doing half the crap that they're doing. Absolutely. However, if you're faking orgasms and you won't even get that vulnerable with your partner to be like, hey, this actually isn't working for me. What if we tried some of this? How? And like, that's that to me, that's where we need to start fixing some things. Like if we have better sex ed, if we have better maturation programs, if we learn how to advocate for ourselves, hopefully when you are going in to have the birth control discussion with your doctor, you're saying, ooh, I don't know if I want to do that. What about this one? If you learn to advocate for yourself with your doctor and with your partners, what is that then going to look like in the birth room, right? Hopefully we start to see the maternal mortality rate come down. So having discussions with your partner about what's working for you sexually is important. There's weight to it, right? We need to be able to use terminology with our partners. We need that practice so that we can teach our kids about this stuff later. It's the only exception I think I would ever say, like, because I've had someone who are like, well, I was in danger. And I'm like, why were you having sex with that? That's fine. If you need to fake an orgasm to get out of a bad situation really, really fast, that's the only hall pass I'll give anybody. Outside of that, I would still say maybe don't get in that situation if you can avoid it. But outside of that, quit faking orgasms. I can't, it breaks my heart because I will occasionally get a DM from someone that's like, I've been faking for 17 years. What do I do? Yeah. Because it's 17 years in, you're going to need a therapist for that one. Like they're going to you. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like that isn't a conversation 17 years in. That is lying to your partner in the most vulnerable and intimate way for 17 years.
And these things are so common. Like people don't think but they're very common. And there's a lot of reasons. I mean, you're kind of alluding to one, which is abusive relationships. And so people will do things to try to, you know, lower anger, lower conflict. And so that aside, because I think that's a different conversation, I think the primary reasons that I see women faking orgasms, and men fake them too, believe it or not, but women primarily fake them at a much higher rate than men do, is because they either want the experience to stop, but they don't know how to say that politely, right? Because we're supposed to be polite.
Or be nice and polite, please, people.
Yeah. Or exactly. The second one is to not hurt their partner, that they don't want their partner to feel like they're not a good lover, which again, just goes to show how we socialize people with vaginas and vulvas to cater to people with penises, right? And to be caretakers and to be comforters. And these are the stereotypes of femininity, right? The feminine that is all about taking care of others. And that is very, very harmful. And I've had, you know, heterosexual couples that will come in and she'll finally share this with her husband, let's say, or her partner, or her long-term partner. And it's interesting to see those reactions too. Like sometimes, even if it's a compassionate response, it's also usually a very sad response, like hurt, you know, like, wow, like here, I thought we were having this kind of an experience. And yet now I'm having to face the fact that wasn't really the experience we were having all along.
And this is the script flipping that I was talking about earlier. Can you imagine if your male partner was faking orgasms with you for that long? How would you feel? It's not okay. You know, 100%.
And I think people come into it with, again, like I'm always a very big fan of systemic blame, right? Like I don't necessarily to go be like, oh no, now I feel a ton of shame because I've been faking orgasms. It's like, no,
No.
I've been
Yeah.
faking orgasms because the system has set me up for failure in so
Yeah.
many different ways. And this was a solution I found that
Yep.
maybe had some short-term benefits, but nobody taught me or helped me understand what maybe the long-term repercussions of that. Plus, when you're faking an orgasm, you're basically faking bad education because your partner is thinking, oh
Reinforcing.
wow, this is working. Like this,
Yep.
this must be working. This must be really
Yep.
great. Whatever I'm doing in this moment must be working for this body that seems
Yep.
to be responding in such a wonderful, pleasurable way. So
Yep.
you're misinforming the person who's going to touch you and who's going to be with you in regards to what actually feels right. So
Yep.
I'd 100 point agree with that. So what other than not stop faking orgasms, what other things do you want people to know about their sexual?
Well, this kind of goes hand in hand with this, but that your orgasms are your responsibility.
Mm.
I think so oftentimes our sexuality is owned by our parents and then our ecclesiastical leadership, our church leaders, and then it's owned by our partner. I'm so surprised at how many women, especially like people that identify as women, feel like they don't have any ownership in their own sexuality. And I did think that this was something that was more unique to our like Utah conservative society. We both live in Utah. It is countrywide an issue, and even outside. I mean, Canada, Australia, England. This is a common issue of like, that's not.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know about that. That's not my thing. He just needs to make me
Right.
come.
Well,
So
because if you're in charge of your own orgasm for, eons and eons, we were considered whores and sluts, right? So
still are in some ways,
yeah, you're not supposed to
Proud to
know
be.
that much about yourself. You are
Yep.
supposed to be the innocent bystander who gets awakened and gets to bloom because somebody else is fertilizing you, right?
Thank goodness. What would we do without the fertilizer?
So, anyway, yeah. So this is another thing that I think women come at kind of innocently, right? Is that this is kind of the system that they were brought up in, that there was a lot of shame attached to owning your own orgasm. So what ideas or thoughts do you have about that?
That you should take ownership of it. You should have an understanding of what that's like for you, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, why. There is nothing wrong with getting to know and understand your anatomy, what arouses you, what doesn't. I always love sending people home with a mirror. I think go take a look at it. Changes color, it changes shape. It literally does blossom. Like, what does a vagina at rest look like, or a vulva at rest versus a vulva that is aroused? What does your clitoris look like when it's aroused from what you can see externally? What is the inside shift and like, how does that shape change? Like, understand these parts and pieces of yourself, and then go to your partner with this information, and don't be afraid to advocate for your pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a much better life having orgasms. It really is.
And as we're talking about orgasms, I just think I always want to put in a plug for omgs.com. As they're doing some of the best research around this and making it into teachable educational videos and resources and all kinds of things to help female bodies understand very effective ways to reach orgasm and to have pleasure.
Yes. And I want to be careful too, and you'll totally get this. Let pleasure be the measure, right? It doesn't always have to be about an orgasm. We should ideally go into interactions with our partners not necessarily goal oriented, but pleasure oriented. I've had fantastic, very enjoyable sex where an orgasm was not a thing that was going to happen that day, and still had a really great time. So I definitely do want to put that out there too, that having an orgasm all the time, every single time for everybody does not necessarily have to be the only goal of like a sexual experience with your partner, but it is definitely a great goal to have, and really, really fun when it happens, right?
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with that because sometimes whether it's erections or orgasms or
Yep.
lubrication, when we're putting all this pressure on kind of an involuntary part of our
Yes.
experience with our bodies, because you can't just push a button and say, it's not like I can say, I'm going to open my hands,
Yes.
and pull my fingers. That's not
Yeah.
how penises and vaginas work, really. So,
Mhm.
so it isn't,
They're
and
not as on command as we'd like them to be
yeah,
sometimes.
right. Exactly. And that's what can feel so frustrating about it as well, right? So, all right, I know we're out of time. Like I seriously, I'm like, because I want to talk to you for like 5 more hours. But
I
if you could share
know.
like, I don't know, 1 to 3 nuggets, like you just are like, these are just things I want everybody to know.
These 3 are going on my tombstone. Don't fake orgasms, don't use tampons, and love your body. It is the only place you have to live. This is where you get to experience life. Find a way to make peace and find love for your body because it is yours.
Yeah.
Experience life through it instead of as someone looking in, take it as someone looking out.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, we could spend a whole hour talking about body love, right?
Oh,
Because
totally.
not only have we been taught not to like our shape of our body or certain aspects of our body, whether it's our hips or our tits or our butts or our
Mhm.
stomachs or, our necks or our cheeks. I mean, wow,
Pick a thing.
wow,
I know.
wow, wow.
Endless. And don't
And
worry, there's a plastic surgery or a cream for all of those.
right. And we're not supposed to age, and all those kinds of things. And so for even before I get to the genitalia, we already have so much body shame. And believe it or
Yes.
not, your internalized body shame does affect your genitalia and how it responds in a sexual space, right?
Yep.
And then add to it, even if you have I've had people with fairly good body image still have a lot of disgust or disdain for their genitalia. And so really kind of learning to love something that, again, systemically, we have not been taught to love, neither our
Yep.
bodies, but especially our pussies, right? And so
Yes.
it how can you start really making friends with these very, very like kind of sacred parts of our bodies, right? And very personal and very, I mean, like, even sticking with the female body, everything from, intercourse and bringing in a lover to pushing out this amazing baby.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many things happening in this region that is
Yes.
core and central. It's core and central, right? Our
Yeah.
vaginal cavity and it's just in the core and central part of our body. So I I just will say amen, amen, amen to doing body love work, whatever that means for people, whether it's taking time to look at yourself, whether it's time to, bathe yourself, touch yourself, taste yourself,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that will help you integrate who you are with your body. That
Oh,
will
yeah.
help pleasure immeasurably, whether it includes orgasm or not. Yes.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, where can
Yeah.
people find you? What are you doing? What do you want to put out there? Say, okay, come to my blog. You have a great Instagram account. Tell us what you're doing.
I mean, I live on Instagram for sure. That's where I put the most love and affection currently. So Instagram, I'm at the Vagina blog. I have a website. I also have a podcast. I'll be starting up season 3 this fall, which is super exciting. So I'll be coming back for that. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So follow April, follow the Vagina Lady. She's amazing. Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna go get rid of all my tampons now and go get a cup. There you go.
Thank you for having
goal.
me.
That's my goal for the week. Have a good day, April. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The intro and outro music for these episodes are by Otter Creek.
There is a place where time slows to nature's pace, and there is space there to find yourself. yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. No tishkish say the no. So we can always go to the homeland of the heart. 10,000 years of our human history etched on her canyon walls, alongside Earth's mysteries. Some places should be left alone. No tishkishay the novel. So we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart. Deep in our cities, we sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left alone. No tishkishay the novel. So we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart.